Good morning. I'm Linda Baker, the Learning Director at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. And with me is Diane Lalonde, my colleague network team and a research associate here. And on behalf of our team, I would like to welcome everyone to our webcast today. Our webcast series is a new series that we've taken on, and it features new, exciting resources that have been developed by our leading Ontario stakeholders. And our hope is that by introducing them and having presentations on these resources, that people are more aware of them and able to make use of them. So wherever you are today on Turtle Island, please join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands, and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous peoples. As settlers, we commit to making the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. We are bringing today's webcast from the Learning Network as part of this new series that we recently launched. Before I introduce our speaker, Mandy Bonisteel, I'll go through the format for the day, and we're gonna just change it slightly. So we're gonna hear from Mandy for up to 45 minutes. And during her presentation, we invite you to type any comments or questions you may have in the chat box, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, sometimes we wait and have all of those questions at the end. But for this presentation, Mandy's going to stop periodically and check in as to whether there are any questions or comments. And at that time, I'll present those to her, and Diane will assist me with that. And she'll be able to address them as we go through the webcast. And that way, if your question or comment relates to a very specific content that Mandy's just covered, it'll be more relevant for you and for everybody else that's watching. Also, as always, there'll be a link in the chat box at the end of the webinar or webcast for you to evaluate this webcast. And we really value that and look forward to your responses and comments. And then that'll lead you to the evaluation, to the section, the box that it will bring up a certificate. And you just have to fill in your full name and email address, and that certificate will be emailed to you promptly after the webcast. And that's a certificate of participation. So the webcast recording, thanks to Mandy's generosity, will be available on our website within the next few days. And so you can refer to it, but also if there's people in your organization that weren't able to join today, they'll be able to do so. And we know that that gets used a lot. We have close to 400 registrants today. And we know that some of those people will follow the link and go to the recording after. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mandy. Mandy Bonisteel has worked in the anti-violence field for a long time as an advocate, a consultant, and a therapist. She's worked with both survivors and perpetrators of violence. In Ontario, she authored the Ontario CAS-VAW Collaborative Curriculum for Workers Supporting Children who have witnessed women abuse, developed the Respect at Work training materials for CREVA, and delivers curriculum design training to educators. Mandy coordinates the Assaulted Women's and Children's Counsellor Advocate Program at George Brown College, a unique combination of feminist counseling and social justice courses that combine the skills of support and activism needed to advocate for women, their children, and their communities. Most recently, Mandy co-developed CREVAC's online training that we are featuring today, responding to disclosures of sexual violence on university and college campuses in Ontario. So please join me in our silent applause for Mandy, and we're going to turn it over to you, Mandy, to lead our webcast.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you. And you're going to interrupt me if I can't be heard or if there's something technical I need to know about. I'm just moving to the first page of the, can you see that first page of
Yeah.
the, okay, good. All right.
We hear
Okay,
you
that's
very
great.
clearly.
Oh, and I see Annalise on. Well, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. This training has been a wonderful, it's really been a wonderful endeavor, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to explain kind of how it came about and talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how we developed it, and to introduce people to how to navigate it. So thanks very much for having me. I'm just wondering, are there any folks, Linda, are you able to just kind of ask for a show of hands if we have folks that are not with post-secondary institutions with us?
Sure. I would be pleased to. So in your Q&A box, you'll see that you can raise your hand. And what we'd like you to do is raise your hand through the Q&A box if you are part of a community-based organization that is not with a post-secondary school organization. And Diane, you have younger eyes than I do.
There's still more coming in, but it looks like 34 people.
So we do have a few that are not with post-secondary institutions. Okay, good. That's good for me to know. And the other question I have is, are there a few online right now that are not from Ontario? They're not in Ontario now.
Ooh, so could you raise your hand if you're outside of Ontario and joining us this morning? What does that look like, Diane?
That's about 30 people.
About 30 people, Mandy.
Okay, that's good. One of the things about this training is that it was developed in Ontario for Ontario post-secondary institutions, but it's also very usable outside of Ontario. And I'll get back to why that's the case, because it's free, it's available, and there may be lots in it that's useful for folks that are not in an Ontario post-secondary institution. I'll just carry on. But a bit of the history here. So in 2011, the Ontario government developed the Sexual Violence Action Plan. And I really want to read this quote, although I kind of can't because I see, sorry. Endings, can I just say something, Linda? A lot of the boxes of people are covering up my slide, and I'm not totally sure what to do about that. I'm going oh, no, I got it.
Okay, great.
So I just want to read this quote because I'm going to come back to it. We used this quote as part of as our guiding principle. Ending sexual violence is a shared responsibility that will require the efforts of all Ontarians. It starts with changing attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. It requires a commitment to ensure that survivors are treated with respect and dignity and receive the supports they need to recover and change their lives. Then in 2015, the It's Never Okay action plan to stop sexual violence and harassment in the province of Ontario was unveiled. And within that was also unveiled Bill 132. And Bill 132 is legislation that amended the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities Act, that's the MTCU Act, that gave post-secondary institutions new responsibilities related to the prevention of and responding to sexual violence on campuses. Between 2011 and 2015, a couple of documents were created it sounds kind of small to just say documents. There's a lot of work that went into these documents. And in my opinion, especially for anyone outside of Ontario, the work that took place while there was kind of preparation on the government's end to eventually change the legislation that made the requirements for post-secondary institutions, the work that occurred really supported us moving ahead and taking action once the legislation changed. And one of those was a document, and Linda and Leanne and Annalee, you're both here, Overcoming Barriers and Enhancing Supportive Responses. And this is research on sexual violence against women. And it's a resource document very focused on some wonderfully, probably difficult to find research on responses, the effective responses. And it was, it's an excellent document. Anyone that's online can find it. I'm going to avoid, I was going to click to it, but I'm just going to avoid that because I don't want to have technical difficulties if I don't need it. And I'm sure Linda and Annalee, you'd probably say, well, I wish we could do that again, because there is probably much more research that's been added since 2012. But I do recommend it for folks to take a look at, because what's in it is excellent material. And I will be referring to some of that research as I go through this presentation. The second was that the Ontario Women's Directorate, in collaboration with MTCU and quite a lot of community folks, some are online, I'm assuming one of them was me, certainly Linda and Annalee were part of that, the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers. There's quite a lot of input into both these documents. And this is Developing a Response to Sexual Violence, a resource guide for Ontario's colleges and universities. And in the end, this resource guide was very helpful because most of the post-secondary institutions in Ontario were able to use this guide to develop the policy that they were required to develop. It really helped move things forward. I think if you're out of province and there is any kind of initiative going on in your province that has to do with supporting policy and procedure development for any of your colleges and universities, this is an excellent, excellent document. So going back to the quotes that we looked at, in terms of our overarching goals, some of the language you just heard from the government was that we have a shared responsibility. We want to ensure that survivors are treated with respect and dignity. They need to receive the supports they need to recover and change their lives. It is about us changing attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, and it's focused, in this case, on responding to sexual violence on campus. So I just want to talk about some of the, what the challenges, clearly that was it's a challenge to meet all of those goals. And on the one hand, I would say, yeah, it's a pretty tall order. But on the other hand, I would say we were really glad to start with such broad overarching goals. It really meant that it was important for us to not have a narrow training. So first of all, this had to be available and relevant to all employees of post-secondary campuses in Ontario. And that means no matter what their position. We certainly know, and especially if we go back to Linda's research, we know through research that when survivors of sexual violence disclose, they will disclose to whoever they feel comfortable with. They might also disclose without intending to disclose because something about the system requires them to say something in order to achieve something else. So we have lots of situations where students who are needing some more time to do an assignment, while they're asking for that time, the story rolls out as to why they're asking for that time. So I'll talk a little bit later about some of the situations of disclosure. But that meant that we wanted to expose any employee at any level in post-secondary campuses in Ontario, because it wouldn't be possible to say only some people are going to be disclosed to, or it wouldn't be possible to tell students that you can only disclose to certain people. And we had to make sure that it was completely survivor focused, that we worked from the survivor's viewpoint and point of view, and that their voices were actually in the training. We wanted to make sure that our intersectional gender analysis was clear and that it was embedded throughout, not just a few pages kind of somewhere else, but embedded throughout the entire training. And we wanted to make that as sort of an action thing, so that we were challenging social norms, challenging structures, and putting forth, I don't like to say best practices, because the most promising way to respond. I want to talk a little bit about that too. So we wanted to make sure that that was also throughout the training. Social learning and adult education methodology, that was very important. So we want to support people to be ongoing learners. We wanted this training to also be a resource site. We wanted it to have a way to navigate through that gave choice to a variety of types of learning. And we recognize that this is not, it's not the kind of training where there's an answer to every problem. It's social learning. And social learning means that we grow, we change the way we move forward, and we affect the way other people move forward by what we learn in this. And the structure of the training needed to allow the learner to kind of follow their own path of discovery. At the same time, it needed to be formal. It needed to be possible for, so lots of institutions are asking their employees or portions of their employees to get a certificate of training. But at the same time, the informal nature also has allowed it to have a variety of uses. So it can be used for, and I'll speak about that later, but some portions of it are used by any of the health sciences, social sciences that want to actually talk about supporting survivors, any HR, any courses that have to do with some content has to do with workplace legislation and how to manage situations of violence in the workplace. So there's been quite a lot of uptake in this as for content. And it needed to be doable. It needed to be very doable. Somebody hopping online who is, and this I think applies to most people, worried that somebody will disclose to them, hoping that somebody doesn't disclose to them, wants to know what's the bare minimum that I should just know about if somebody tells me this. And we also wanted to make it doable if somebody wanted to not just know the minimum, but to be able to think through what else can I say, what more do I need to know about systems, and how can I participate in my post-secondary institution in a meaningful way. So we developed an advisory in order to meet these goals. First of all, a survivors advisory, and this is a survivors from across the province who had experienced sexual violence in the context of their post-secondary institution. They were interviewed both individually and in focus groups, and they gave us some very powerful insights about the needs and gaps in current services and systems. Also on the advisory, in terms of the representation from post-secondary, we had Brock and Western University, the University of Toronto, York University, University of Windsor, Sault College, Fanshawe College, George Brown College, Queen's University, and Nipissing University. And from those institutions, we had representation from faculty, administration, residents, folks, counseling and accessibility supports, Indigenous services, health and wellness, human rights, equity and diversity, and safety and security. Also members of the advisory were the Canadian Federation of Students and the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers. So one way to look at the layout is to look at it from the point of view of, we developed 13 survivor scenarios. And of those 13 survivors, they are in various ways linked to the content modules. So those 13 survivor scenarios have their own story in the context of systems of discrimination. They all have a variety of intersectional identities. The responders that they respond to in the scenarios also have their own set of intersectional identities. We wanted to make sure that in their stories, the various myths that kind of underpinned their stories were variously attached. We also wanted to talk, we have a section called Methods of Coercion. There's, I think, a pretty common idea that particularly students might not see what happens to them as sexual violence. And that was not our survivors' experience. The experience is more likely, this makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'm not so sure it's wrong. Or I'm not so sure, it makes me feel uncomfortable and it probably is wrong, but I'm not so sure that people will see it that way. So we have a section called Methods of Coercion because we want to kind of pull out and describe the kinds of behaviors which might be missed as sexual violence, which are in fact methods of coercion. So we decided to frame a discussion about that. Of course, we have a section on consent. We have a very big section on effective and ineffective responses, and various responses are attached differently to various scenarios. Different relationships between survivors and responders. Are they speaking to a dean, a supervisor? Are they speaking to a peer? We, of course, wanted to make sure that we linked where relevant, the scenarios to various pieces of legislation to look at. Going up to the top on the other side, we wanted to discuss the barriers for survivors. And again, sometimes that scenario is linked to a specific barrier, and you can, while you're watching that scenario, you can also link to the page that describes those barriers. Context and motivations for disclosure. So just about every scenario has a different context or motivation, reasons why the person is deciding to disclose. And context and motivations for responses. We wanted to recognize that for the most part, people want to respond to the person that comes to them. And they want to do a good job. And it's our sense that more opportunities to look at various responders and see if what they're offering is something that we can repeat. We wanted to make sure that we had lots of, in addition to the 13 scenarios, we have 26 responses. Each scenario has an ineffective response and also an effective response, and an analysis of both of those. The survivor relationship to the institution was important to us. Some of the survivors are also employed. So we wanted to make sure that we looked at both what it meant to be, both have an academic relationship, but also be employed by the institution, and add in the experience of workplace sexual harassment or violence in the life of a student. And we also have survivors who are employees of the institution. So we also added in there's several scenarios that have to do with not students disclosing, but employees disclosing. The perpetrator's relationship to the survivor. So sometimes we have survivors who also have experienced past historical childhood sexual abuse. Some of our survivors don't know the perpetrator. Some of our survivors are experiencing ongoing harassment and violence at the hands of a group of people. So we have a variety of, some of the perpetrators are faculty, and that's what the student is disclosing, but not always. And then we have a couple of sections on professional practice, which is looking at, so we're all employees of those of us who are employees at a post-secondary institution. And because this legislation says that our institution and those of us in it are being asked to develop the skills of responding to someone who might disclose to us, and to know what resources are available to them. That is part of our professional practice. So everything related to that is in a section called professional practice. We also have a section on institutional practice, where we put together some of the ways that institutions are sharing ways of moving forward. And in that section on institutional practice, we also have every policy from a link to every policy from every post-secondary institution that you can look for. So if you're from Georgia and you're online and you want to check out and you're doing the training, or you're looking for some resources, you can quickly look at your own institution's policy by going through the training. Let me just take a look here. Are there any questions at this point, Linda, that I should be addressing?
No, so far
Okay.
we've got all little technical hiccups ironed out, and
Okay,
we're just
all right.
so
Okay.
far.
So just basically in the design, so this is the header on the website. I'm just going to click on it and see if this works. I'm clicking on that so that you can have a look at the website, and I am making a new share, and it should be opening. Hang on a sec. And okay, hang on. No, I don't want to do that. I want to click on this. And I want to share that. Okay, this is the screen of the website. Anyone can see that? How am I doing, Linda? Can you see the website?
Yes, we can see it, Mandy.
Okay, thanks. So you could scroll along and see how all the drop-down boxes are including the modules. So this is a website. At this point, this is just a website. It holds the training, but the website itself has lots of information, and as a website alone, it contains a fair amount of opportunity to scroll around and look at things. It has a lot of other embedded videos and resources. So simply as a website, you can scroll through quite a lot of content. And I just got to get my little face out of here. Yeah, so that's laid out on its own. And anywhere in the website, you can also hop on and do the training. And we're going to do that in a minute, but we're not going to do it now. I'm going to just close that. And I'm going to share this again. Also, for those of you who develop curriculum, all of those many bits of content are sitting on, inside of 4 basic outcome areas. 1, how to respond effectively. 2, where to seek resources. 3, to examine one's own attitude, behaviors, and belief. And 4, to expand our professional practice. One of the things that occurs regularly is a repeat of key concepts that are really an important part of social learning. So in this case, we repeat quite frequently that we want to, at the bottom, ensure that survivors are treated with respect and dignity, and that they receive the supports they need to recover and change their lives. Also, getting back to the doable part of things, in the end, because many folks really just want to know, tell me the basics of what I need to know. In terms of effective responses, although we have lots of responses and there's lots of ways to go forward with this, we talk about next steps in case people have questions like, okay, I've basically responded, but what happens next? But basically, all employees can listen, be supportive, be non-judgmental about the survivor's decisions and reactions, and preferably accompany that survivor to the right person who can provide the help they need. And in most institutions, there is a sexual assault support or a sexual assault advisor. Sometimes security would be the right person, and sometimes counseling services. But in the end, those 4 things are repeated throughout the training. So in terms of social learning, we want the very basic to be felt and understood, and for anyone who takes the training to at least feel confident that they can do these things. Listen, be supportive, be non-judgmental about the survivor's decisions and reactions, and accompany that survivor to the right person who can help. And I'm just moving to the next slide. Periodically, we also offer what we call a montage. So of the great many ways that a person can say something that's supportive, what we did was we put together periodically, you can also click on this and just see a number of ways that people, and these are all little bits that come from all of the scenarios which we're going to get into later. So here's a montage of supportive responses.
Oh, Anna, and I want you to know that
I'm just going to pull this back again.
Oh, Anna, and I want you to know that I'm here to help. That's rough. Sounds like this guy's a predator. I can understand why you're so concerned. It must not have been easy to come to me with this.
This guy has no right to post those pictures of you.
Well, I can certainly understand why you're finding it difficult to continue with your research. You need to feel safe before you can focus on your work. It took a lot of courage to tell me. Thank you for your trust. You don't have to go through this alone, Jenna.
I can understand why you don't feel safe. Ben betrayed your trust. From what you've told me, it sounds like no one helped you when you needed it most. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Okay, I'm going to just take a minute to close that and make sure that I am sharing again. Okay. I just wanted to comment that we spent quite a long time hiring all the actors, and we specifically asked that the actor be of the social location, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity that we had written into the scripts. It took a while. We have 3 Indigenous actors who are playing in the scenario. That indigeneity is part of the scenario. It was really fun to make sure that to work with the actors and for them to be being themselves really when we did this filming. I'm going to show another montage because it was very important to be clear that support is emotional support. We just respond to what the person says, thank them for disclosing, but we really wanted to make sure that we were being very clear about tangible supports. And that's a big part of this training, that we keep making it possible that folks know what could be a tangible support, finding the information. We have quite a big section on accommodations. We gathered a lot of information from post-secondaries about various ways that they accommodate students. we wanted to make sure that we shared that because I know it's a big struggle for post-secondary institutions to create accommodations and feel that there's a tension between academic integrity and having accommodations. And so tangible supports and our section on accommodations is really quite fairly extensive. I'm just going to play this video. This is just a montage. I'm going to open it.
This has a number of tools we can use.
And hang on, I'm just going to share it.
That can support you further.
And share that, and then start it again. Sorry about that.
This has a number of tools we can use.
They have other resources here on campus that can support you further. Let's look and see what we can find. Let's find contact information together. We have an equity representative as well as a sexual violence support person here on campus.
I appreciate you for trusting me with this. I think the first step is to talk to our sexual violence support person.
I want to make sure that you have all the support you need to get you through this, including medical help if you feel you need it. If you want, I can give you the number of walk-in clinic and the local sexual assault center, as well as some good organizations that counsel and support sex workers.
I'm just going to pause that so you have a chance to see it. One of the scenarios we saw earlier was actually an online class where the person was disclosing in class, and that faculty used the chat box to type a supportive response. And this person is saying, I think you should talk to someone who knows more about this. Let's see. So she's just going online and finding that there's a supervisor, a union steward, a sexual violence support person, an equity person, and she's looking that up on her institution's website. She's also discovering that there's a sexual assault center and offering to go with her colleague. Just going to go back to the one online if I can find it. Sorry about that. There. One of the scenarios is an online class, and the student begins to disclose, which is in fact a disclosure to the entire class. There is quite a lot of discussion in this scenario, and in the end, the professor responds supportively to the student in front of the class, which we all know as teachers, sometimes we are modeling for an entire audience. And so Professor Daniels here says that there's a sexual assault violence support person, and also says that they're going to post the contact information and the webpage resources to the class, given that they've just had this discussion. And what's not shown here is that he says also, let's you and I talk. So anyway, that's one of those montages. And I'm just going to share back to, yeah. So those are sort of basic skills. There are 3 quizzes in the training, and also a final quiz at the end. Folks can do the quizzes as much as they want. They can go through them as many times as they like. Some learners, as you can guess, if they're told to do some training, go straight to the quiz. For some folks, they already are good with the answers. For some folks, when they get to some of the questions, they're going to have to look for the answer in the website. And again, that's what we want adult learners to do. We want adult learners to know where to find the information if they need it, as opposed to memorize and simply answer the questions. we also formulated the questions so that the maximum number of of messages are in the questions. So instead of a question that asks for the right answer out of several wrong answers, we wanted the person doing the quiz to end up reading all the right answers and only perhaps in this case pick out the wrong one, because the more times we read that sexual violence is highly underreported, it's a subject of pervasive myths, it's based on gender-based discrimination, but it is not infrequent. So what we do is we keep reinforcing the information and messages that are the go-forward ones. Another method we use is that after every scenario where there's an ineffective response, we end with a supportive response. So we always end with the most important information to keep. Let's look at another one of the quizzes. Yeah, so in order to answer this question, you'd have to go back and see the scenario of NADA. And we're simply asking which the professor should not do. So rather than, again, what's the right answer, we want, in order to do this quiz, folks are having to read, affirm that violence is against the law. That's a good thing to do. And let Nada know that he understands why she doesn't want to report. Okay, that's probably a good one. Offer to accompany Nada. That's another one. Maybe tell campus security. Call the police. I get it. So call the police is the one that we really want to say. You know what? There's lots of things to do and say, but don't call the police. So we wanted to sort of narrow it down to, so that's kind of the way the quizzes are organized. This takes a bit of training, reading, but again, we want to say that this isn't just kind of an initiative that we're sort of doing for, because some of us care. This is a requirement by MTCU that every college and university be able to appropriately accommodate the needs of students who are affected by sexual violence. And that they are not required to report an incident or make a complaint in order to obtain the supports and services for the accommodation. So this is pretty key. And this is the one quiz question where I've actually written in the legislation because it's quite a challenge for post-secondaries to accommodate students, because we all know that when students ask for accommodations, there's usually quite a lot attached to that. And we are saying that they don't have to report or make a complaint in order to get the support services and accommodations. So in this quiz question, somebody might have done the module that had a lot more discussion about different kinds of accommodation, but when we get here, we've at least put in several. So scheduling of appointments to avoid the harasser, deferral, withdrawal, retaking a course without academic penalty, rescheduling test assignments or other deadlines, and at the bottom, not having to recount their story. So not having to tell the teacher, and then also having to tell OSAP to get an adjustment if there's a change in income, then also having to tell maybe accessibility services, or not having to keep repeating the story. And that's where the sexual violence advisor plays a very key role. But here we are. Requesting accommodations from each professor and providing medical notes, no. So that is the answer to the question. It's the one thing that does not fit the description of appropriate accommodations. And again, we're looking for the one thing that doesn't fit as opposed to the one right answer. So we could say, thank you for telling me, how can I help? And we could say, this is not your fault. And we could say, here are some resources that can help you. And we can say, we have a sexual violence support person here, can I take you to them? But you should report this so it doesn't happen to someone else. That's got to be the wrong answer. So that's a bit of the construction of how the quizzes work, just so you can see it. This is a screenshot of the navigation page. Again, people should move through the training at their own pace. They don't have to cover off all the modules and pages because they can move backward and forward between the training and the website and within the modules at any time that they like. People can explore further links for additional resources. It works like any website. You click on one thing and you think, oh, there's something else, and click on the next thing. And it allows the adult learner to follow their thinking and discovery path. People can view the scenarios. They can also pause them, and they can skip them. So it's a very loose structure, so that you know, for some people, watching the scenarios can be very activating. And the stories, some of the stories are, they're difficult stories. And we want to make sure that people have access to this anytime they like and can return to things, but also they can separate themselves at any point. And not every, you don't have to watch every scenario. If you felt like the scenario was activating, you could skip the scenario, because every scenario also has a written analysis page. We want to make sure that this is something that's inclusive and also possible, you know, for folks that are affected by the content. People can choose to obtain a certificate, and there's also an evaluation survey, which we're paying close attention to, and actually enjoying reading what people have to say and finding little glitches, and not so many glitches, I hope, but you know, ways to shape the wording that helps people to, based on people's feedback. Now let's just checking again, Linda. Anything I should answer before I just go to the web page and we do a little navigation?
Yes, a few things, Mandy. The first question that's come in is, we work with survivors. Many are non-female. Given what we know about the unacceptable number of non-female survivors, is this not a barrier to reporting to CALL, this particular initiative?
Oh, lots of survivors don't identify as, are not women identified and non-female, and we have several scenarios that address that, for sure. I'll make sure that when we go to the scenarios, I focus a little bit more on those. And yes, that is a very important barrier. Any way in which someone is marginalized is part of the barrier of disclosing, and feeds into the myths that that only certain people experience sexual violence. So thanks for asking that. I'll focus a bit more on that when we get to the website.
Okay. And in terms of the scenarios, which I think anybody watching, I'm going to speak on behalf of myself, they're so rich, even the montage that just makes you want to see the entire scenario. And one of the questions is, are all those who disclose students, or do they represent other individuals in the university community, such as a staff member,
Yeah.
a support staff administration, a faculty member?
Yeah, we have scenarios of faculty member and two other employees. One is a woman who works in the tech department, and another is a woman who's also deaf, who works in the custodial department. So we have 3 employees scenarios as well. Yeah, if we have time to do an employees, I'll certainly introduce you to the scenarios.
And do we know how many, much about the people that have taken the training so far? Are many students taking the training?
So the last time I looked at some of now this is the feedback. So the thousands of people who've been on the website and taken some training, I don't know what we know about them, but I do know from the ones who specifically gave feedback, yes, even though it's for employees, I can see a lot of, they're mostly mentors. I'm seeing a lot of peer mentors, so I know that they're students, they're in a mentoring capacity. So part of their role as students is also to be sharing this with other students. So I've seen quite a few naming themselves as peer mentors. Yes.
Okay, so you answered, another question came in and you answered it in that answer. So that's wonderful. Maybe we'll turn it back to you for now, Mandy.
Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to link on the website and we're going to go into the training and I'll take you around for a few samples. Can you just tell me when my 45 minutes is up, Linda, so I can pay attention?
Well, your 45 minutes is up, but don't worry about that because you've also been answering questions throughout.
Okay. Okay.
So you've got 10 minutes left, so you're good.
Ooh, okay. So I'll see if I might beg you for 15, but anyway, going to get to the website. And I'm going to share that. So you can see the website, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
I'm going to click on Take the Training.
Okay, just while you're doing that, Mandy, I'm just going to read a comment that came in. In terms of students, do student leaders take this training? Yes, student leaders are taking this training at King's University College. I'm a student in the Bachelor of Social Work program and have several leadership roles on campus. So that's nice feedback. Mandy, I think you froze. So we're just going to wait. Oh, there she's back. Okay. Yeah, we see you now, Mandy.
Okay. And you can see that we're in the training. It says Start Training with the red button.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're in the training, it looks like this. There's a lot of ability to scroll and choose, and every single slide is named. So you could, if you wanted, pick things out, and I'm going to do that through the table of contents, or you can just say next, and you can go through the training by simply going to the previous and next buttons. And every slide also has other places to go. So you could click on the Center for Research and the Canadian Federation of Students. We can, I'm just gonna, let me just find, we can, in the beginning, there's lots of different campus toolkits and draw the line, and there's lots of places to go from every module. If we go to the Miss section, we'll see that, so if we want to take a look at this from, actually I'm just going to go back a little bit. So if we look at consent, when we're in the consent section, anytime we see a circle with a survivor face in it, we can also choose that survivor. So we can look at a scenario anytime their face comes up by clicking on the images for the scenario and see that that survivor also is got a story that's related to the topic that we're on. And we also, if we go into myths, we find the same thing. So if we went into a particular myth like provocation, we would see a survivor and we could click on that survivor and have that survivor story linked to provocation. Here is the myth about male survivors. We can choose either survivor. And if we do that, we will also, so let's click on Kai right now.
The problem is, I need to get a job as soon as possible. My parents have struggled to provide me with an education. But now that I'm graduating, it's time for me to start paying my own way. I remember how long we had to wait for my student visa. I need a letter proving that I'm a student in good standing from Professor A for the application. And he's been like a mentor to me. has helped me out so many other times, right from when I first came to this school. But when I asked him for this letter, he said we should have breakfast and talk about it. We've had lunch in the cafeteria together a few times, so I asked him if that's where he wanted to meet. And he said no. That he wanted to have me over for breakfast at his house. And that's when he invited me over for the weekend. Said he wanted to spend some time alone with me before I graduate and leave him behind. I thought he was joking. But then he questioned if I really understood what it meant to be a student in good standing, implying that a student in good standing wouldn't have a problem with doing what he asked.
So let's go through this whole scenario so you can see the setup for every scenario. So while you're watching Kai tell his story, you can go back to the myth, which is how we got here. We could also click on to methods of coercion. If we do that, we'll find
So Mandy will be back with us in just a moment. She's experiencing when she moves within the training that it freezes, but it won't do that when you do it.
it's not freezing at this end. Are you seeing that?
Yes, we did, but you're back now.
Yeah. And Nelson is an Indigenous student who was exploited in the past by a trusted adult and is recently being harassed with someone with whom he went on a date and is being harassed online. And that disclosure occurs in a online class. So let's go back because we're continuing to look at Kai, but we could say, oh, let's look at another situation where the pro-social, according to the research, or the well thought of person makes it harder to disclose because the survivor is worried about what other people think of that person. So let's just go back. We've just heard Kai tell his story. So if we go to the next
The problem is, I need to get
slide,
a job.
we get to see an unsupportive response.
Wouldn't have a problem with doing what he asked.
You must have misunderstood. I've known the professor for over 20 years. He has a wife and kids. I know he's written those letters for students such as yourself. Let me talk to him and see what he has to say about it.
So a lot of you are saying, ouch. Wow, that's a terrible response. He's breaking confidentiality. He's named that he holds the perpetrator in high regard. And then so following that, we do have a section that talks about why that's unsupportive. We can also go back to the myth of male survivors, back to the methods of coercion. While we were watching that scenario, we also could have clicked to another section, which is more ineffective responses, but goes to Linda's research, Linda and Lee's research that describes the types of ineffective responses, some of the research as to what they look like and why people use those responses. Just going to go forward. Let's look at the supportive response.
Wouldn't have a problem with doing what he asked.
I can understand why you're so concerned. It must not have been easy to come to me with this. You worked hard. There's a lot at stake here, for both you and your family. I want to assure you that this will not affect your academic standing in any way. I'm going to do everything I can to support you and help you get this sorted out. All right?
And then we have an analysis of that supportive response. And if we want to, we can learn more on some study on responses by faculty and how they varied. We can take a look again at that method of coercion. We can most of the scenarios also have a next steps. Again, basically, people are just asked to listen, be supportive, don't judge the survivor, and connect that survivor to more resources. However, this training has been used in a variety of ways. I know several institutions have brought together, the sexual violence support person has brought together clusters. So there might be a cluster of counseling folks who are going to ask more questions and think more about their practices. Definitely security. Some institutions are pulling together their security folks and using some of this as just information for training. We can take a look, we can learn more about international students and some of their struggles, and Kai's an international student and he's being exploited because he's an international student with his work visa being dangled by the perpetrator. So that's an example there. We can go back to methods of coercion and maybe take a look at so we entered in at this point from the myth of male survivors, but now we're in the section on methods of coercion, and we see Nelson again. So he's our Indigenous student who was disclosing online. He's also being harassed at present by the person he went on a date with online. And there's another person being harassed online, so we can take a look at Natalia by clicking on her if we want to. You could just go through every, you could start at the beginning and go right through every module from front to beginning. Or if you're like me and most people, you think, oh, I'd like to see that scenario. So we'll turn on Natalia.
I can't believe Steve would do this to me. We were together for almost a year. He was so cool when we first hooked up. Even after I broke up with him like 2 months ago, he wanted me back so bad. He was kind of cute. But when he finally got that it was over, he totally freaked. We used to text like constantly. He kept bugging me to send pictures of myself, my body. So I did. It was only for him, right? Flirting, you know. But now he's using them to get back at me by posting them on Facebook. Everyone's seen them. Even my parents. I didn't even know until my girlfriend told me because I unfriended him after we broke up. Which is why I can't even ask Facebook to take him down now. I was hoping my friend would help me with that, but she said I sent him the pictures. What did I expect would happen? I asked Steve to delete the pictures, but he won't. Said everybody deserved to know what kind of girl I am. Now it's like I can't even go online anymore. Every time I do, it just gets worse.
This is one of the ones we use for security training. Here's the unsupportive response.
It just gets worse.
Sending those types of photos of yourself to anyone is never a good idea. Once that stuff's out there, there's no telling where it might end up. I can maybe have someone go and talk to Steve if that's what you want. Bottom line is, next time, think twice before hitting send. If you don't stay offline, there's little nothing we can do.
So we all know that that's a very unsupportive response. The thing about these responses, though, is that they're just so common. Sometimes when we look at the unsupportive response in the training, we think, oh, wow, can't imagine it's really a drag somebody would say that nowadays. But we do have a section in the training that talks about some of the reasons, not to excuse, but to recognize that some of our responders who are frustrated with the amount that this happens, they really and we've all heard stories about folks who end up saying victim blaming things when they would say that their motivation is they just want to prevent this from happening and wish people wouldn't put their pictures online or wouldn't wear something. And part of the research that Linda and her team did was to take a look at the kind of ways that some responders are they're simply being self-focused. They're expressing their frustration. They end up blaming the survivor. So we have quite a lot of roads lead to that as part of the training. Just go to the supportive response so we don't end up with the negative one in our heads.
Every time I do, it just gets worse.
This guy has no right to post those pictures of you. So let me walk you through your options. What he's done is illegal. We can contact Facebook and get them to delete the pictures off their site. If anyone contacts you, anyone new, any strangers, we need you to contact us and let us know. I'd like to meet with Steve. Talk to him.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll get back to you as soon as I know anything.
And we can analyze what's good about that. There was no more interrogation. Next steps are explained. There's quite a lot of research on responses by security police and investigators, and there's a good piece of research there that's sort of useful for folks in uniform. We can move to more learning about Canada's criminal code when it comes to images of the person. We can take a look at more resources for folks who are being harassed online. We can have more discussion about next steps. It would be helpful if the officer accompanied Natalia to the sexual violence support person. There are more resources for youth, distress centers, that kind of thing. I'm just, what do you think? Should I stop here, Linda, for a bit?
Yeah, I think I'm noticing some people are having to leave in terms of other commitments, Mandy.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we should wind it down here, unfortunately, but just
Okay.
to honor the time commitment.
Okay.
But I really, on behalf of everybody who participated, want to thank you. It's an amazing training resource. And I say that I'm not having developed it. So it's not like patting myself on the back, even though it is associated with CREVAC. And I think that we hope that you will pass that on, Mandy, to your co-developers, because just the thoughtfulness in terms of socialization, intersecting identities, the knowledge, the multiple resources all in one place. It really is amazing. And we really thank you and your team for that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we want to, just so people know, obviously Mandy's an amazing resource. It's not a coincidence that our center continually reaches out to Mandy, an honorary member at a distance. So again, a wonderful resource for people. And I don't want to overwhelm Mandy. I know she's really busy, but just given we have a limited time here. And we want to remind you the evaluation link is in the box. And also just to remind everybody that our gender-based violence work in context, addressing structural violence and promoting agency is happening on October 8th here in London. And we really urge you to go to our website and register if you haven't done so. And we again, thank you, Mandy, and we look forward to people joining us for future webinars and webcasts. So we'll say bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.